I think every investor looked at me like I was absolutely nuts because why stop the growth that you're seeing? And I think what I saw, again, listening to the market and looking forward, was this reality that out of the 1,200 clients, one or two were going to succeed.
CEOs spend their days building their businesses, and strategic questions often get pushed to the nights and weekends when they finally have time and space to think about the bigger picture. I call that CEO Pajama time. I'm Sari Kakenoff, the CEO of Enzyme, where I work alongside health tech leaders at exactly those moments. Come behind the scenes with me to learn from successful CEOs about the critical decisions and inflection points that shape their companies. Welcome to the CEO Pajama Time podcast. Today, I'm excited to host Michelle Davey, the CEO and founder of Wheel. So just to start us off, can you just help the audience understand what is Wheel? What do you do today? What are you known for?
Wheel's a bit different when you think about a telehealth company or a virtual first care company. We're really building the infrastructure behind virtual first care. So how we enable companies and clinicians to work in virtual first care. So you may be a healthcare company, a payer provider, or a more innovative brand, a retailer, et cetera. How do you build a virtual first program to help your members get access to care? So Wheel is the engine behind those companies, fully white labeled. So we have everything from the software to an independent network of physicians that works behind the scenes to actually deliver that care, the quality assurance, the legal and the regulatory, all built into one single package to launch a virtual first program.
Got it. That's helpful. All right. So now let's go back in the time machine. What made you start Wheel? What was the kind of thing keeping you up at night that you were like, wow, I need to start this? And what was Wheel in the beginning? Was it what it is today, or was it something else in its first life?
I always say Wheel's always in motion. It's changed so much from the very beginning, even from the idea that we had at the beginning. So the problem that I saw, my background is actually very serendipitous to Wheel. I would say that it looks very purposeful that this is what I built at Wheel and put all those blocks together. But it was really a culmination of multiple things, both professionally and personally. I've shared my story many times, but I think it's a story that's important because it's one that many people in the U.S. still face. I grew up in a rural part of Texas and went undiagnosed with an autoimmune condition for over 15 years. So I was intimately familiar with the healthcare system that was broken, that left me out, that didn't work for me and where I was from an access perspective. I think that drove me to my career in healthcare. And then the perverse incentives at a young age drove me out of healthcare and into tech. So I actually swore off healthcare. It was like, I'm going to tech. I love the pace, the innovation. And I just didn't see that in healthcare, large healthcare at the time. And tech was really where I got my feet under me to understand kind of what it was like to be in a fast-paced environment, push the boundaries of what was always done. I then ended up in a startup building a marketplace, intimately familiar with 1099, gig economy, labor work, helping people find additional opportunities on top of whether that's their full-time opportunity or maybe they're a caregiver working kind of part-time. So did that. And then not until 2016 did I find telehealth as an overall category professionally. And to me, it just made so much sense. As somebody who grew up in rural Texas, this would have been really helpful for me at the time.
Yeah.
I think what the problem was with 2016 telehealth, if we think back that far.
10 years at this point, believe it or not.
10 years. Pre-pandemic feels like a lifetime, right? And this was pre-pandemic. So utilization was low. There was still predominant big players, Teladoc, Amwell at the time,
Yeah.
MD Live, were urgent care shops, right?
Uh-huh.
So, and predominantly video or phone. And again, from an accessibility perspective, broadband access in rural
Uh-huh.
communities are really challenged. So, what we saw was there was these newer companies coming up, these digital health companies that were pushing the boundaries maybe in asynchronous care, had new types of care programs coming out. But what they lacked at the time was access to high quality clinicians
Uh-huh.
because pre-pandemic, telehealth for a clinician in their career was actually seen as kind of a dirty little secret that you
Right.
didn't do. And so we wanted to change that. That was the
Uh-huh.
idea. We saw these new age of telehealth at the time, just pure line telehealth and digital health companies who needed access to clinicians. And they wanted high quality clinicians. And then on the flip side, we wanted to be in the partner to the clinicians to help them vet these companies, ensure
Yeah.
that their licensure and livelihood was protected. And then lastly, that they were able to see a viable career
Uh-huh.
in virtual care. And so started the company in 2018. Very different than it looks today. I call it the hire.com of telehealth. We were essentially matching clinicians and companies together,
Uh-huh.
recruiting them and kind of stepping out of the picture. What we found in that was actually clinicians wanted more. They wanted us to vet
Uh-huh.
those companies. They wanted help with scheduling, et cetera. And companies wanted more. They wanted
Yeah.
more help with credentialing. They wanted help with making sure the clinician was online at the right time, et cetera. And that was what sparked the idea for the very first kind of horizon of Wheel and Horizon 1 of Wheel, which launched in January 2020, was a marketplace company that was a tech-enabled marketplace. We would plug our APIs behind some of the large and
Uh-huh.
small digital health and telehealth companies, empower it with a network of clinicians who we were training, educating, and ultimately helping work in a whole new way. I mentioned January 2020 is when that launched.
Right.
Very quickly, the world changed in
Right.
March, end of February, early March, 2020, and virtual care just absolutely
Uh-huh.
exploded, and we were on the front lines of that.
Yeah. So I guess I'm curious if you walk me back to those early days. So you started in 2018. In 2020, you launched the new version of the world, which it sounds like required a lot more capabilities on your part than the original version, especially coming from tech. I feel like version 1 or like almost version 0 was much more like a tech platform, it sounds like, versus version 1 was much more of like a care delivery company. Can you walk me through some of that decision-making process that you went through in between those? Like, were your investors behind you? Were you doing customer discovery? Like, what data were you using? How did you sort of make that decision to say, "You know what? Actually, we're gonna really become a healthcare company?"
It's a great question. So the very beginning, I was bootstrapping the company. So
Mhm.
there was no investors saying, this is what you need to do. Here's how you need to evolve. Which I think for me was positive because it
Mhm.
allowed the freedom in this space, but also because I was funding it myself, the mindset of scarcity, right? So
Mhm.
every dollar I put to work was my own dollar.
Mhm.
And when you do that, you have to make really tough decisions of where you're going to place that dollar for investment. So the evolution from 0 to 1 of what was then Enzyme, then became Wheel. Enzyme was, yes, it was a totally different platform. It was a different company, a different name. And part of our rebrand was to memorialize that, but more importantly, move forward on
Mhm.
what Wheel was. So the decision to make those changes, like I said, came mainly from listening to the market, listening
Mhm.
to what customers were asking for us and what our clinicians were asking. And I think really important for CEOs your customers and your users are going to ask for a million things.
Yeah.
Your job is to figure out and sort through the noise, right? And for me, those early days, I was still in every clinician conversation. I was still
Mm-hmm.
recruiting myself. I was absolutely in every client conversation because I was doing all of the
Yeah.
BD. And I was finding thematic views from each one. And that is what ultimately then changed the shape of the company. And that also changed the trajectory because that is when we then raised capital in order to fundamentally make that change. I don't think I ever sat down, sorry, and really thought like moving from a healthcare, like a tech
Yeah.
platform to a care delivery company. I just was listening to the market and evolving based on that.
Yeah. That makes sense. So it's almost a process of firstly be there with all the customers hearing, but then a process of listening for the patterns, like waiting for things to bubble up and be repeated, and then saying, okay,
And
we
I
got to
still do
add
that.
things.
It
Yeah.
is one of the reasons that I still run the commercial organization at Wheel.
Hmm.
I not only do I love to be next to the clients and the customers, but hearing the market and understanding the overlap and the needs, I think is the most critical part of a CEO's job because the market is evolving so quickly, both in healthcare, but even AI and
Hmm.
landscape that aside. There's no better place to be than listening to the market and your customers. And
Yeah.
so, I still do that every single day.
Yeah. So maybe walk us through some of the other evolutions. It sounds like you said wheel is always changing or always evolving. So and the name is kind of apt given that. But so if that was Horizon 1, what was next?
Yeah, so Horizon One was really our tech-enabled marketplace that I talked
Mhm.
about. That really saw scale in 2020 for all the
Mhm.
obvious reasons. Not only the large um, change from kind of in-person care to virtual care, that was one component, but we also saw a pouring of investor dollars into the digital health space, which created more digital health companies than
Mhm.
ever. So we, at that point, were, I think the stats where we were seeing about 1,200 uh, inbound like contacts from founders at the time,
Oh, wow.
a week. Like we were just trying to keep
Oh,
up with, and
wow.
there was all these people with ideas, which was beautiful to see because we built the company so that builders could build incredible virtual services on top of it. But what we found was a lot of in the pandemic, we were servicing a lot of the SMBs and
Mhm.
some enterprises. I remember the day I walked into a board meeting. We had the like investor hockey stick growth during pandemic, that one
Mhm.
chart that everybody wants to have. And I walked into a board meeting and I said, we have to stop this. We have to go at the enterprise.
Mm.
And we can't support the SMB as aggressively as we have before. And I think every investor looked at me like I was absolutely nuts because why stop the growth that you're seeing? And I think what I saw, again, listening to the market and looking forward, was this reality that out of the 1,200 clients, one or two were going to succeed, which is
Mhm.
great when they really blow up and succeed. And one of our first customers in the early days on Enzyme was this 8-person startup called Hims.
Mm. Oh,
So
wow.
we absolutely saw this like rocket ship growth, but the reality was that was not going to be the bulk of those. And
Mhm.
as the market reset, not only uh, from a financial perspective, but also people going back for in-person care, there was going to be a convergence down in the digital health space. So we made that change. We did go after the enterprise. It was a hard decision because two things. You called something out. One, it's just hard to stop servicing customers that are your bread and butter. And like, it's hard to turn down revenue, quite frankly, as a CEO, because you're trying to grow a business. And then second, it requires new capabilities.
Yeah.
and very different capabilities to service an enterprise customer and a very different motion internally and kind of culture.
Yeah.
Uh, and that had to evolve. So Horizon 2, we became what we call a platform company that has a marketplace as a component. And both the tech platform, but also all the other core platform components from the marketplace and the labor marketplace to the clinical operational component to the regulatory pieces. And we made that evolution uh, in Horizon 2. We made that evolution in 2021 and really powered that going forward, but had to build significantly new capabilities,
Yeah.
including an EMR. So
Hmm.
that was something I said I would never do.
And
Uh,
that's a
and,
homegrown, a
and it's
home-built EMR.
yeah, a fully
Oh, wow.
home-built EMR, that operates now, at scale over 2 million patient visits a year, on track to do, 3 to 4 million this year. So just, a very different scale, of software system that you have to
Yeah.
CFO.
So when you say enterprise, what kinds of companies were those?
In the early days, we were focused on digital health enterprises, so the GoodRx's of the world. Like,
Mhm.
really, what the line that we draw is 50 million in revenue,
Okay.
or bigger. And you typically have to have an active member population,
Mhm.
whether that's your retailer and you already have kind of retail members, that you're a pharmaceutical company that has reach. And the reason we look for those existing communities or member bases is because what we found in the early days was your CAC to LTV in consumer and e-commerce healthcare is really difficult.
Mhm.
And many companies never get that correct, unfortunately. But more importantly, we can service those customers at scale with a different set of capabilities. And
Mhm.
so we really see, most of our customers are at that threshold, or above,
Okay.
almost 95%. And so that's digital health companies, pharmaceutical companies, we have payers. We
Okay.
don't have systems today, but we do have provider groups.
Right. Okay, so walk me back to that moment. Like, I'm just imagining whether it's a physical boardroom or maybe it was
It
virtual,
was
but
physical at the time.
oh, well, it's physical. Okay, cool. So you have investors now. It's not just you making decisions. You're seeing amazing growth. I just can't even fathom. You're walking in and you're like, actually, we're putting a stop to that and we're going to try something that's notoriously difficult and complicated and we need to invest a bunch of capabilities in and probably it'll pay off. Like, walk me through how the dynamics were, how you persuaded them, what gave you the conviction.
I think if there's something about me, and this goes back to maybe high school and childhood days, always over prepare. So
Mm,
I spend a lot of time looking at the data, looking at putting together decks, information, CEO memos, anything to help drive clarity on my thinking. And I think that's an important point because when you walk into a meeting, whether it's good or bad news you're delivering, with investors or your company and your employees, thinking through all the, like, what are the questions that may come up,
mm,
where are they going to push, and the expectations, and being ready to answer those helps drive conviction in your answer, but hopefully helps drive you to a place that you're trying to move the company. And I give my investors a lot of credit. I've had many difficult moments with them. I've had many great moments and success with them as well. They support me and what I wanna do as a CEO to take the business forward,
mhm,
and how to navigate the company. They may ask hard questions, and I may have to come back with those answers, but, in that particular moment, the board meeting that was supposed to be gross, great, we're doubling down, was a very different moment. And I think what I would say to other CEOs is just prepare your board ahead of time for that. That is
mm,
not going to be a rosy conversation when you walk in the door. There's something else you want to talk about that's much bigger. And I've used that through many different cycles, the good and the bad, here at Wheel. And it's helped me lead
Yeah.
a
And
conversation.
so practically, how do you do that? Do you get like one-on-one meetings in advance with each board member? Do you send an email, a text? Like, how do you do that practically?
Yeah, I typically have a pre-read
Mhm.
for the board meeting. I've tried all different stuff. I've done Loom videos. I've done slide decks. I've done CEO memos. You got to kind of figure out what works with your board, and as your board evolves, what works with your
Right.
board. And so now what I do typically, because most all of my board members I have a long-standing relationship with now, it's typically a text and a, "Hey, let's talk one-on-one,"
Mhm.
and then spending time with each one of them and walking them through my thinking one-on-one, getting the questions, and then
Mhm.
directly, they will talk to each other. That is just the reality of a
Mhm.
board and the fiduciary responsibility to the company. And then when we come to the board meeting, we're all informed. We know where my head's at. We know where the questions are. We now start to get into the details. We get
Yeah.
into how we operate it. What are the risks? What are we projecting out of that, et cetera? Which allows us to run a much more efficient board meeting that ultimately comes out with a decision versus a update for the
Yeah.
board.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then when you think about the data that was driving that decision, was that just you talking to customers and realizing a lot of them wouldn't make it? Was it you looking at the market and maybe even taking a bigger step back? Do you have a process by which you're is it organic like you just see signals or do you have a process by which, I don't know, every first Monday of the month you sit and like try to assess? Like how does it work for you?
I just realized when you said that I probably should have a framework of like every month I sit down and I think about the market. Um, I don't have that. I am constantly in that mode.
Mhm.
My team knows about me 2 things. 1, I read everything. So I
Mhm.
read a lot of internal documents. I read a lot of external documents. I'm constantly looking at the market. And 2, I ask a lot of questions from my team. They're the ones on the front lines. Oftentimes, they're with the clinician base, with the the customers that are down into the details. And so figuring out how things are actually working is important.
Yeah.
So no, I don't have a process. I think like realistically, I probably should set time down to be
Mhm.
like, "Okay, think about this." It is also a forcing function of board meetings, so,
Yeah.
prep for a board meeting I start prep for board meetings almost a month in advance, and so, it is a reflection period. I think, how that happens now, yeah, is just really organic,
Yeah.
uh but I wouldn't say that that works for everybody. I think that's just
Yeah.
kind of where my obsession lies and, how my skill sets come together.
When do you make the time to read everything? Like, I know even, like, as a CEO myself, like, I have all these things that are on my reading backlog that I don't read. So I'm curious how you make that time. Like, is it daily? Is it what are you
It's
prioritizing? What are you
daily,
reading?
yeah. So, um, there's 2 types of reading. There's internal reading. We are a heavy async culture,
Mhm.
and, uh, that's just it requires a lot of mental space and reading, so I actually set my mornings when I come in. I actually don't take calls. I'm most creative in the morning mentally,
Mhm.
and so I want to be able to read. I want to be able to brainstorm, with our teams, and I set time to do that, typically an hour and a half to 2 hours, totally
Uh-huh.
blocked Monday through Friday. I then, once I put my kids to bed is typically when I pick back up,
Your
and at
pajama time.
the pajama time, and those times I'm not reading internal documents most of the time.
Mm.
That time I'm looking at external, uh whatever it is, right? Whether it's a newsletter, whether
Uh-huh.
it's, a report, any type of information that's been shared and put into my backlog, I'll at least try to read for 30 minutes, of that, and consume I think important, consume what I think is valuable and leave what I
Mhm.
don't, right? There's a lot of opinion, there's a lot of news cycles. I think you have to be cognizant that as a CEO, not everything applies to you and your business. It's okay.
Yeah.
Um, to like wash that out of your brain is also important because you have to make capacity and space for the things that do matter.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay, so that was Horizon 2 of Wheel. Are you still in Horizon 2 or are you in
Horizon 3 of Wheel.
Okay, so tell us about
Yeah,
that.
which is actually a nod to now our new tech platform, our AI-enabled platform. It's also called Horizon, and it's a nod to I use the Horizon framework with my team.
Mhm.
What happened post so we go to the enterprise. We started in predominantly digital health at that time. We buy a tech platform, so we bought GoodRx Care's
Mhm.
platform. We integrate that platform to all of our core services in 9 months. So a
Uh-huh.
heavy, heavy technical lift. And great, fantastic. We brought on large retailers and pharmaceutical companies on top of it. Now, Horizon 3 has been building an AI native platform, an AI powered platform that helps, operational lifts both internal to the company
Mhm.
as well as the clinician base. And then secondarily, kind of where it's going is helping, um, you know, just continue to drive enterprise across multiple segments and multiple care conditions. I think what's
Mhm.
interesting in this horizon, like we used to predominantly do what I call convenience care. So you're like
Mhm.
ED, UTI, not just like cold and flu, but kind of
Yeah.
the convenience level care. Now we do condition management as well. So our partners can
Mhm.
launch a convenience care program, an urgent care, primary care program, but they can launch weight management programs, menopause programs, longevity
Mhm.
programs in one single platform, but have multiple programs for their member bases. That is really Horizon 3.
Mhm.
And it's unique because what we utilize is AI to help navigate patients or members between those,
Mm.
um, and having one single platform to do that. It has its nuances for sure, but it allows us to scale within a client,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
kind of that way of expand motion. That's really important in healthcare because there's just not depending on which segments you're in.
It's not
Us
endless.
There's
Right.
not endless number of customers you can bring in, but how you expand and treat their member bases are really important.
Yeah. Okay, so you did this tech acquisition, you did, and you then basically replatformed again after. I'm curious, you said that you are very involved in the commercial side. Are you also involved in the technical side in depth, or is that something you more leave to your technical teammates?
I would say I'm not, I see myself more as a commercial founder. That being
Mhm.
said, I wouldn't say I drive the product roadmap. I spar with my chief product
Mhm.
officer and product leader on the priorities of the roadmap that are intaking from multiple areas, right? So everything from our clients in the commercial market, and we have uh, like our internal teams, obviously, and then third user base is kind of the clinician user
Uh-huh.
base. And so and then the fourth is like an innovation track where I spend probably the bulk of my time is thinking about that innovation side of the business and the
Uh-huh.
commercial side of the business and how it impacts the roadmap. And the team does most of the work around the clinician side and kind of
Mhm.
the day-to-day operations because they're on the ground of that. And then we do work to prioritize it, but I don't actually like get down into the details on those. My
Mhm.
goal is to really stay at the innovation layer at the product side and then have fully capable leadership
Yeah.
and teams in order to execute against the priorities of business.
Yeah.
And we
That
do
makes sense.
try to use like percentages of where we spend time. But anybody who services large enterprises will tell you they demand roadmap space. And so how you
Yeah.
balance that with innovation is typical. I don't know that we have the perfect
Mhm.
uh, equation for that, but we do our best to ensure that our customers can still get their needs met while the cross-platform continues to be innovated.
Yeah. So tell me about the acquisition. How did that happen? Was that you saying, "Oh, we need to acquire a tech platform"? Was that more opportunistic? What happened
So,
there?
I had just hired a CTO and a chief product officer, and I brought them in 4 months before because it was apparent that we were gonna have to build a platform. I didn't know what that meant. I kept saying, "It's not an EHR, it's not an EHR, it's not an EMR. We're not building an EMR." Um, and I knew we had to build it because when we went up level to the enterprise, what was different about them was the smaller companies at the time were willing to hack things together. And there was
Mhm.
smaller uh EHRs, EMRs in market. There still are that were servicing that level of a client. When you step up to the large enterprises who are doing hundreds of millions of revenue, and they have a different level of software buying needs and a
Uh-huh.
different security and all of the things. What we found in that was two things. One, we had different capability needs, as I mentioned, and two, um, there wasn't something in the market that met that today that we could easily fit our program into.
Mhm.
So, example, we couldn't innovate on top of Epic.
Uh-huh.
Elation was probably the closest thing that we were looking at, or Athena, but it still wasn't a virtual first platform. It
Mhm.
was a brick and mortar first platform that had some virtual care in it. And that's a
Mhm.
very important distinguishing point for us because all of our care is starting online. It may not end there, but it's starting
Mhm.
there. And we need to service more and more patients. And so it became pretty clear at that point we need to build a platform. That then goes into the build by partner
Yeah.
discussion. And we had moved out the partner discussion. We were going between build and buy. And we were servicing GoodRx as a customer at the time. And quickly, our clinicians loved it. The feedback we would get about their EMR was that it was great, is the best thing in the market, and all of these things. And it prompted a discussion with their leadership team. Given our existing relationship and our longstanding history, would it make sense that we actually take it in house, and then use it for their systems as
Mhm.
well on their program, which allowed them to have reliability and scalability without the operational overhead. And
Right.
then it allowed us to work it into our larger systems.
Yeah. It's kind of such an interesting puzzle piece kind of fit
It is,
there.
yeah. And I'd never done an acquisition. I'd never that had not been something I'd done before. I honestly, it was a lot of learning. And even though they were a customer, one of the things I have learned in M&A is like, very few times is somebody either going to buy something from you or you're going to buy something from them that you've never used, that you're not
Mm.
deeply embedded to. And so those relationships really matter because that may either be your home in the long term or you may be
Yeah.
acquiring something in. And so that was a really important learning during that phase.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what it's like to bootstrap versus have venture capital money. I know, it's interesting. A lot of companies go one way or the other, and you've had the opportunity to do both. So what are your takeaways from what were the advantages of each, and what would you tell founders who are considering that trade-off?
So I talk to founders about this actually quite a bit at their earliest stages because there's more capital than ever at the early pre-seed stage than there was back when I was fundraising. And so a lot of people at this time and period can raise capital with an idea
Mhm.
in a pre-seed world, especially if you have like the network or
Yeah.
things that you've been around in this space. There is definite trade-offs, and that's a reality. I think there's also the reality of, can you personally fund a company or not and still have a
Mhm.
lifestyle that you're comfortable
Right.
with? Maybe at this phase in my life with two kids, I wouldn't have been able to make those same kind of
Mhm.
decisions. But back then I had less of my own personal overhead and a really strong belief. I think something I've always had in myself is a strong core belief that I can do whatever I put my mind to.
Mhm.
Um, Rightfully so or not, like, I don't know yet, but, that allowed me to have faith in bootstrapping the company. Albeit what I was doing, I was still working during the day, freelancing,
Oh,
consulting, and
I
then putting
see.
the
Okay.
company with that at night, and then eventually I stopped doing that and just had enough, savings, quite frankly, to put
Yeah.
myself and the business forward. And then we did all the things that you do in a bootstrapping company. You take credit lines and paid to them
Mhm.
down and up and down and up. And, we did a family round and uh quite frankly, I think nobody told me that a friends and family round was just not really your friends and family. Like you still had to go out and find like angels because most of your friends and family aren't going to give you money.
Right.
And so we did that. And then when we finally got institutional money, what changes is just there's two things. You sign up. And I think people don't realize that the money doesn't come free or it doesn't come
Mhm.
with an expectation that, oh, if this doesn't work out, like that's okay. We're gonna walk away. And venture capital different than private equity, but venture capital has a little more risk tolerance, but not that much, right? Like you can't just be like, ah, that didn't work out, and I have nothing to show for it. You really are working to scale the business at
Mhm.
predefined kind of rates. And I think
Mhm.
uh, that is the trade off. There is metrics you have to hit, timelines you have to hit them in order to get that next dollars because it's much harder to be a venture capital company and take seed money or pre-seed money in the beginning and then bootstrap it after. I just don't see
Right.
that. Right? So you just have to sign yourself up to be ready for that. And that type of lifestyle. I think a lot of people get into being a CEO or excuse me, being a founder because it seems glamorous. It is
Yeah.
not glamorous. It is a lot of hard work and a lot of decisions, but it ultimately is based on kind of your preference and where you want to be, but also your core belief of how quickly the company can get there. And not every company can.
Right. That makes sense. So is there a mistake that you've made when you look back over the last 10 years? Like what are you like kicking yourself like, wow, I really shouldn't have done that?
I laugh initially because there's lots of mistakes. Like there's lots of things that I thought were gonna go one way, went a different way, or decisions I made that weren't the right ones. I think I want to talk about one because I think a lot of founders went through it and it was a really hard time for me personally. I would say the biggest mistake that I made was after raising venture capital in the time of 2021 to 2022. One of the metrics I would say we weren't held to, but that was a standard in the market, kind of this unsung or undetermined standard, but we talked about externally as founders was like the scale of your team, how
Mm.
big your team was. I would get on with other CEOs. How big's your team? Right? That was
Uh,
a measure and metric of growth. How many people you had, how many bodies and seats were here working. My biggest mistake was falling into that trap.
mm,
Was we need one more person to because one, we needed to burn the capital, or two, there was this thing that may the project that may turn out to be something. We want some people to go think about it, but it was never a business case, had never had the true underlying fundamentals
right.
for a hire. And I say that's a mistake because now I know everything has a business case and an ROI, and everything has and you retreat too far from your core. It's a whole new business,
Mhm.
not a product uh, kind of evolution. And I made the mistake of hiring lots of people that, quite frankly, the business wasn't ready to support.
Right.
It was that forward-facing growth. We're gonna be here in 12 months. The market's so hard. Let's hire all these people now. And I've had to make really hard decisions, and some of my darkest days as a CEO has been, unwinding that from the company,
Yeah.
whether it be layoffs or transitions.
Mhm.
Uh, but I would say that's the biggest mistake I've made in the company, and I've
Yeah.
really learned from it at this point.
And so in some ways, like, bootstrapping keeps you from doing that because you're so cost conscious with every role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the world, one of the things that has changed when people talk about market changes, like, with AI, the number of people that work at a company is not a glamour metric anymore.
Yeah.
I don't nobody even asks me that anymore. And that's a really nuanced change, I think, but a really foundational change. So you see multi-billion-dollar companies being built with 20 people
Yeah.
because of the tooling and the resourcing. That being said, it wasn't the right way to think about it. And to your point, like when
Yeah.
you're bootstrapping, you think about where all that dollar goes. When you have a different from $10 to millions of dollars in the bank, you make different decisions because you have more risk tolerance because you're not running out of capital.
Yeah. Although, another thing I've often thought about is that the amount of dollars in is something we count a lot in the ecosystem. Like, oh my, how much have you raised? How much have you raised? And that's also not a success metric. That's just a input, right? So really, we should be talking about like what's the return, which obviously takes a long time, and so it's hard to talk. And it's not as clean, so it's hard to talk about. But that's another one where, you know, just the amount of money in isn't really a success metric.
I don't know that we've found the success metric in
Mm-hmm.
healthcare yet. Because I also think like it's money in, but then it's like, well, what's your valuation? And like I've also learned along this journey that your valuation actually doesn't matter until you
Yeah.
exit. Right? Like,
Right.
it is your valuation is whatever somebody either will pay for it or that, like, your share price will be at the end of the day. It's not what investors will mark it as, during those time periods because it will rebalance itself at whatever your
Right.
exit opportunity is, so it doesn't actually matter. It matters for, like, tax reasons and things like that, but I'm saying, like, as a
Right.
glamour success metric, and then from a revenue perspective, that's hard too, because there's a lot of companies that have either really high revenue or what I've seen in the industry of a couple is like you have contracted ARR and
Yeah.
GMB ARR and so it's like, well, how's that translate to my revenue? Is that the same? Is it
Right.
different? So I don't know that we found the success metric yet.
Yeah. Oh, here, that'll be a puzzle for another day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to wrap us up, I'm going to ask a couple of kind of rapid fire questions. The first one is, do you have any hot takes, like something that you would kind of get in trouble saying at a conference or, something like that?
Oh man, I always get in trouble saying something. But I've been saying this for the last year and I fundamentally believe it that GLP-1s are going to be more disruptive to healthcare than AI is.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. That's
And
my
that
hot
just keeps evolving. Like every few months,
that's
there's
my
more
hot take.
news to,
I
yeah.
think and not just like today's GLP-1s, but the
Yeah. Yeah.
future. It's going to fundamentally rewire cost of care and what enterprises in different parts of the market and how they um, historically have paid for things is going to
Yeah.
change.
Interesting. All right. Myth busting. What are some things people tell CEOs and founders that you think are not true?
I said one that like this lifestyle's glamorous. It's
Mm-hmm.
definitely not true. We're not on private jets. We don't get to spend more time with our family. All of those things. It's actually a lot harder, I would say. And not all of us make it. Longevity is really
Mm-hmm.
hard.
Yeah.
And you have this level of uh, I wouldn't say decision, but when you have a level of um, just intensity
Mm-hmm.
on yourself 24/7, 365. So that's probably my biggest myth.
Yeah. And then last thing, is there some signal you're keeping an eye on that you think other people aren't really paying attention to?
Oh, that's a good one. There's so much happening in healthcare right now, in our space in particular. I think it's very rare that uh, government regulations are changing as fast as they are.
Mhm. Yeah.
GLP-1s are entering and consumer-driven changes are happening, and I lump that into GLP-1s because of how
Yeah. That kinda
fundamental
catalyzed the market. Yeah.
catalyze more of the market. You have AI coming in. I just think there's like this perfect storm
Uh-huh.
innovation. I think the signals that I am watching, and maybe people are also watching, but is the stagnation of the large payers,
Uh-huh.
of their values in the market.
Mm.
And the reason I say that is going back to the conversation about hot take. I think we're in a huge rewiring of the system. And for a long time, many of us have beat our head against the wall saying, value's the way to go or this is the way to go. I actually don't think we have a clear signal on the way forward. We just know it's being rewired right now. It's still going to take a lot of time. But I think the signals of the large payers seeing pressure on
Yeah.
caps is a really interesting signal that things are changing below the surface that haven't been changed in a really long time.
Yeah. Alright, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Had a great time.